So the projectile motion, a two-dimension motion, which is also called a projectile motion, we can solve by taking the motion independently, horizontal and the vertical, or you can also learn these formulas about the projectile. If we talk about the maximum height of the projectile, how we did that? So overall motion, when we define the overall motion, like if a projectile is launched from a certain height or from the origin, like it is launched from the ground, this will be u. It will have the two components. One of the component is with an angle, that will be u cosine theta, and the other component is opposite to the angle, that is u sine theta. Now, the trajectory or the path which the projectile follows, so this is the trajectory or the path, say this projectile follows, and it returned. The maximum vertical displacement, that is called the height, and the maximum horizontal displacement, that is called the range of the projectile. So this is the height of the projectile, and the horizontal distance is the range of projectile. When we are finding the maximum height, we have to use a vertical motion. What about the vertical velocity here? The vertical velocity will be 0. So when we use this equation, like we use this equation 2as equal v square minus u square. So 2, now in the vertical plane, like this is our origin, okay? So any vector which is pointing upward, any vector, not direction, the vector which is pointing upward, we'll consider as positive. And any vector which is pointing downward, we'll consider as negative. That's why, like u sine theta, it's an initial velocity which is pointing upward. But what about the acceleration? It is always pointing downward, which is, that's why we call that as minus g. All the places, the direction of the expression is downward. That's why it is not considered as A, it is considered like not positive, it will remain negative throughout the motion. S is a maximum vertical displacement, final velocity is 0. And what about the initial vertical velocity? So this will be equals to u sine theta and then whole square. When we simplify, this will be minus 2gh is equals to minus u sine theta whole square, and negative sign will cancel a negative sign. So if we need the h, the maximum height of the projectile, it will be u square sine square theta divided by 2g. That is the maximum height which the projectile will reach. So if I know the initial velocity and I know the launching angle, I can work out what will be the maximum height reached by the projectile. If I need the total time of the flight, so total time of the flight, the projectile is first going up and then it is coming down. So what is the vertical displacement? If I use this equation, S is equals to ut plus half at square. If I use this equation, S is equals to ut plus half at square. S is a vertical displacement. So what is a vertical displacement? It goes up vertically and then come down to the same level. So the vertical displacement is 0. Because I'm using a vertical displacement, so the initial velocity, I have to substitute the vertical velocity, vertical component. That's why I have to substitute u sine theta. Instead of u, it should be u sine theta. T is the total time of the flight plus half. Expression will be again negative, even though it's going up and coming down, but the direction of the expression is always downward. That's why it will always be negative g for a full motion. And then time is t square. This will move other side, so minus u sine theta t is equals to minus half gt square. When we simplify this, like if I move this other side, so this will become half gt square is equals to u sine theta t. And then we cancel out this t with a square. So what is the value of a t? 2 will be multiplied. So 2u sine theta divided by g, that will give us the total time of the flight, how long this projectile will remain in air. That is the total time of the flight. So 2u sine theta over g is the total time of the flight. Is it clear, this formula? The total time of the
Yes.
projectile? or time of the flight, we can also say. Then what about the range? If we need a range, the range depends on the horizontal component only. The range depends on the horizontal component, which is u cosine theta. So for a range, we have the formula that speed is distance divided by time. Usually short derivations are there. Usually short derivations are there, especially in Cambridge. So better learn these. So if we need the distance, distance will be speed multiplied by time. Exam style questions I will solve as well. So you will have a better understanding how you will get the question in exam. So the distance is a range here. What about the speed? Which speed I should substitute? The horizontal speed, which is u cosine theta. And what about the time? Time is the total time of the flight. The total time of the flight is 2u sine theta over g. So what is the total time of the flight? The total time of the flight is 2u sine, because this is the total time. So I can substitute here 2u sine theta divided by g. So when we simplify this, so range is equals to u multiplied by u. This will become u square. There will be 2 cosine theta and sine theta divided by g. Now, in trigonometry, those who are taking maths, they will learn this trigonometric relation that when it is 2 cosine theta and sine theta, why 2? Because it's written here 2. This 2 is there. So this is a 2. Cosine theta and sine theta multiplied divided by g. In trigonometry, yeah, it was written with the sign. It was written like, because the total time of the flight was 2u sine theta over g, that I just substituted 2u sine theta over g. So in trigonometry, maths, you will learn that 2 cosine theta multiplied by sine theta is equals to sine 2 theta. This is a trigonometric identity. Like sine square theta plus cosine square theta is 1. That is a trigonometric identity. Same thing, 1 over cosine theta or 1 over sine theta. These are trigonometric identities. So when we have 2 cosine theta and sine theta, that's equal to sine 2 theta. So what will the range? The formula for the range is equals to u square sine 2 theta divided by g. So if we want the range of the projectile, the maximum distance covered by the projectile, it will be equals to u square sine 2 theta divided by g. That's the formula to get the range. And when we'll have the maximum range of a projectile when the launching angle is 45. If we launch the projectile with an angle of 45, it will have the maximum range. So if you launch a projectile with an angle of 45, this will have the maximum range. But if you increase the angle more, like more than 45, what will happen? How it will affect? It will have a greater height, but the range will be shorter. So if I launch a projectile with an angle of 60, it will rise to a greater height, but the range will be shorter. And if you launch a projectile, example, with an angle of 30, with a horizontal, it will have a shorter range and height. No, there's a big difference between a sine 2 theta and sine 2 sine theta. There's a big difference. They are not same. Sine 2 theta means the value of the theta first multiplied by 2 and then take a sine theta. You can check on your calculator, like if I say theta is 45, so it will be sine. What is a sine 2 theta means? Sine 2 theta means like sine 2 multiplied by 45 first. So this will become sine 90, and sine 90 is 1. So there's a big difference between a sine 2 theta and 2 sine theta. So these are the formulas for the projectile, the range, the total time, and the maximum height. Is it clear till this point? Anyone having a doubt or a question?
No, sir.
So you can use either a formula, the direct formula, or you can just divide your question into parts and solve accordingly. Okay. But the best way to solve the projectile question is always find the time to reach the maximum height. Even they ask or they don't ask, whenever you're solving a question related to the projectile, always find the time to reach maximum height. That's it. And then you will solve accordingly. We will do the questions. One more thing. Example, I have two objects. One is dropped vertically, another one from a certain height we drop horizontally. Both hits the ground. A and B both hits the ground. My question is, which one will hit the ground first? A or B? Which sphere will hit the ground first, ignoring the air resistance? Is it A or B? My question is two objects. One is dropped vertically, another one launched horizontally from a certain height. And this is the trajectory or the path which object B follows. And this is the trajectory or the path which object A follows. My question is, which object will hit the ground first? Is it A or B? The right answer is they will hit the ground at the same time. But how they will hit the ground at the same time, even though they have different launching speeds? Look what will happen. The vertical and the horizontal component are independent of each other. If I say I drop these two objects, now I will use the values to give you an explanation. Even without values, I can write a formula. But say example, I launch these two objects from a height of 30 meters. Okay. What about A? If I want to solve for A, so what is the initial velocity? Initial velocity is 0. I need the time to hit the ground. I know the displacement, the vertical displacement is 30. I know the acceleration is 9.8. meter per second square. So if I use the formula, S is equals to ut, and if I consider this as my origin, depending on which I consider as my origin, anything which is pointing up will be positive, anything pointing down will be negative, or anything pointing down if I take as positive, anything pointing up will be negative. So example, the acceleration is downward, so that will be plus 9.8 meter per second square, and the displacement is also downward, so it's also plus 30. So we have the formula S is equals to ut plus half at square. S is 30, initial speed is 0, the time we don't know, plus half, acceleration is due to gravity 9.8 and t square. So this will be 30 plus 0, 4.8, 9.8 divided by 2, 4.9 t square. So 30 is equals to 4.9 t square, 30 divided by 4.9 in a root. What's the answer for this? I can take negative as well. Then I take look, if I take downward as negative and upward as positive, So the acceleration will be negative and the displacement will be negative. I'll get the same answer. It won't make difference. That's why I did not take that as, it won't make difference to the final answer. So if I take as negative, this will be negative. This negative and negative will cancel out and I get the value for t. So 2.47. 2.47 is the time it takes to hit the ground. So t is equals to 2.47 seconds. So this will take 2.4 seconds. Now let's talk about this object. Say I launch this object with a horizontal speed of 50 meters per second. But this object will have two components, the horizontal and the vertical. The horizontal component remains same throughout the motion. It will remain 50. It won't change at all. But what about the vertical component? The vertical component will increase. So what is the horizontal component? Vertical component here, the vertical component is 0. What about the acceleration due to gravity? What about the displacement? The displacement is 30. So when I solve the vertical component for a vertical component, again I will use the same equation, S is equals to ut plus half at square. And when I simplify, it's the same number like 30. This will be 0 into t plus half 9.8 t square. And when I simplify, again I will get so when I simplify again, what I will get the time as 2.47 seconds. So what it shows the horizontal and the vertical component are independent of each other. It does not depend that whether I throw something with a horizontal speed of 20 meters per second, 60 meters per second, 100 meters per second, it will hit the ground at the same time as the horizontal, as I drop any object vertically. Is it clear about the horizontal and the vertical components? They're independent of each other for the falling objects or in a projectile motion. Why we did not take u as a 50, even though it is given 50 meter per second? But because we are talking about the vertical displacements here, the vertical height, so the height depends on the vertical component. Height does not depend on the horizontal component. The range depends on the horizontal component. If the question was, what is the range of this projectile? In that case, I will use the 50. But from what height I drop from a height of 30 meter. That's why it won't affect the motion. So whenever two objects are dropped from the same height, one is a projectile, another one is vertical, they will hit the ground at the same time without air resistance. That is again. So if I say this object I drop vertically and another object I drop horizontally, like throw horizontally. So can you label the position of this object of B? So yes, you can label. Example, how you can label? The vertical positions will be same. So new vertical position of the B will be here. Next vertical position will be here. Next vertical position will be here. It will move horizontally, but vertically, they will always have the same displacement. Without air resistance, the vertical displacements and the time to hit the ground will always be same. So this is about the projectile motion. Anyone having a question or doubt till this point?